Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Let me start with this question about like us in general as educators. So the question is, have you ever felt that your classroom or program was simply trying to do too much, too much grammar, too many vocabulary lists, too many expectations? And yet somehow you felt that the students are actually learning less, they're burnt out, they're overwhelmed, right? So it does happen a lot. And that's exactly where today's session comes in. The topic is designing classroom or our classrooms with cognitive equity. What does that mean? It's simply put, it's about creating learning environments that respect the brain's limit because every brain has a limit for sure, right? It's an approach that honors the diversity of our students and allow the teachers to lead with compassion and clarity. So over the next 50 minutes, we're going to explore together how to reduce the cognitive overload, how to design for strategy transfer, how to foster inclusive multilingual spaces, and use reverse engineering or backward design and evaluation literacy in order to be able to truly transform our classrooms and programs. And this, by the way, won't just be me talking. I'll be asking you to join in Slido polls, word clouds, and reflections so we can learn from one another. Um, Before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to get a sense. Actually, you know what? You did mention that in the chat, which is okay. From where is everyone coming? So now I'll shift it. Instead of a country, maybe what's your job? So what you will do is you will scan the QR code and you will be able to participate in, the Slido. So instead of from where, just, your job and maybe the school through the Slido. It will create a word cloud. So what's your profession? So you can either go to slido.com and write the number 2729359. And if possible, I would love for all of you to be able to join. Or you can scan the QR code. Perfect. We have educational consultant. So I'll just give it 5 seconds and then we'll proceed. Okay, examiner, bilingual, educational consultant, English language instructor. Thank you so much. I mean, as we can see, okay, I'm a teacher. We have a teacher at a state school. Perfect. So we have all sorts of, professionals in the language world, right? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So now let's set the stage for why this conversation is so important. Everywhere we look, classrooms and programs are becoming more diverse, whether it's in background, whether it's in readiness, whether it's in the needs of the students. And teachers and leaders are carrying heavier loads with increasingly overpacked curricula. And as a result, the students often disengage when the system demands too much, not putting into consideration that students also have outside life, by the way. So this is where equity comes in. And when I say equity here, it does not mean treating everyone the same. It simply means giving each learner what they actually need in order to succeed. So that's our roadmap for today's journey. First, we're going to understand the cognitive equity, what it means, why it should be at the heart of our programs. Then we're going to explore how to reduce the cognitive overload in our classrooms and curricula. We're also going to talk about, how to teach for transfer and strategy use so that learning extends far beyond the classroom walls. And next, we're going to dive into how to lead with inclusion and psychological safety, especially in multilingual context. And finally, we're going to look at how leaders can apply backward design and evaluation literacy, which is extremely important in order to align teaching with meaningful outcomes. And hopefully, by the end of our 50 minutes today, I'm hoping that you will walk away with strategies that you can apply, right away in your own context. Okay, great. So we will start with one of the core ideas behind cognitive equity, and it's the cognitive load. Understanding this concept is extremely essential for designing classrooms that really work for our students. So the cognitive load refers to the brain's limited capacity to process new information at any one time. And when we exceed that limit, it's exactly as if you're filling a cup. The learning stops, the liquid will overflow, right? And the frustration starts beginning. Okay, so there are three main types of cognitive load. We have the intrinsic load, the extraneous load, and the germane load. The intrinsic load is basically the natural complexity of the material itself, the difficulty of the topic itself. For example, the built-in difficulty level when it comes to learning verb conjugations in a new language, for instance. That's an intrinsic load. When it comes to extraneous load, it comes from poor instructional design or, adding unnecessary distractions or giving busy work. This basically overwhelms the students, or even filling the slides with a lot of words, a lot of text, a lot of images, figures everywhere. That creates extraneous load instead of, trying to minimize the amount of text in the slide. Irrelevant activities, confusing instruction, all these create that extraneous load. Then we have the germane load. And this reminds me as if I'm talking about the cholesterol types, the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol, LDL versus HDL, right? So the germane load is the HDL, it's the good cholesterol. In this case, this is the good load, the productive mental effort that will help the learners build long-term understanding. So when extraneous and the intrinsic loads start piling too high, the students will start disengaging. They will become demotivated, and some of them, if we're talking even at college level, they can even drop out. Okay, so our roles as education leaders is to design in ways that minimize the overload that comes from those two, the intrinsic and extraneous, and maximize the germane processing or the good HDL, like I mentioned. So let me give you an example. For instance, we can minimize extraneous load by giving students a clean, simple worksheet with only one grammar rule per section instead of a busy page with multiple fonts, pictures, and unrelated examples. Because basically using clear, concise instructions and in addition to that, modeling one example as a teacher would be great before asking them to begin. So walking the talk somehow. That's one way. We can also reduce, that's one way of reducing the extraneous load. We can reduce the intrinsic load by breaking complex topics into manageable parts. For example, when it comes to teaching past tense, let's say, like regular verbs could be introduced first and then practice, and then irregular verbs and then practice, instead of teaching both of them at once. When it comes to chunk writing tasks, for instance, it could start by brainstorming, outline, draft, instead of asking students to write a full paragraph immediately, for instance. So it's just trying to minimize those overwhelming factors that will make the students, instead of starting to work on what's needed, they are wasting their time thinking, how will I be able to do that, right? And we can boost the meaningful learning represented by the germane load by having students create their own examples, for instance. So if we want them to learn past tense or use past tense, they can use the real life context. For instance, yesterday I visited, yesterday I did this and this, whatever it is. Also using peer teaching. So peer teaching is very effective, like the think, pair, share. Students explain the rule to a partner, and this reinforces schema construction, right? Okay, so now it's your turn. What's your biggest challenge in reducing overload for learners? So you will see the Slido poll pop up when you scan the QR code. You know, Maybe it's too much content to get through, mixed proficiency levels in the same class, limited time and resources, something, or maybe it's something unique to your own context. Okay, so far we have one, and it's too much content. Okay, which I believe, yeah. Then we have mixed proficiency. Now it's 50-50. The competition is high. Okay. So, from what I'm seeing here, I mean, too much content is the top response, which means that, which is very common, by the way, that many of us are dealing with overloaded syllabi, right? And that's a common issue. The pressure to cover everything. It often leaves us little space for actual learning. I have to cover the book from the cover to the cover, and it's not necessarily that it's always productive. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share with you a mini case study that shows exactly how this can impact retention and what leaders can do differently. Okay, thank you for your answers. So in this language program, the syllabus was overloaded with dense grammar and vocabulary targets, and teachers felt pressured to cover every single thing. So what they did is they rushed through the material as if it's a marathon, basically, leaving little time for practice, little time for feedback or strategy development. And the results, unfortunately, are that the learners quickly felt overwhelmed and demotivated. They started disengaging, and within just 2 terms, the students' retention dropped by 30%. So this case here shows us something very important, which is when we try to do too much, we actually end up achieving less. Overloading content not necessarily builds stronger learners, or it's like rigorous. It's not necessarily correlated with rigor, right? Sometimes it weakens persistence and confidence. So if you were leading that program, what do you think could you have done differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Could the syllabus have been streamlined, the syllabi? Could, more time have been given for practice and strategy use instead? Maybe as leadership, maybe you could have supported the teachers differently. Like take a moment and type your ideas into Slido, um, and we'll have a look at the end. Yes, less is definitely more. Okay, drip feed the information according to need, extend the length of the course. That would be wonderful if there is a, capacity to increase the length of the course. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's a time constraint, but I mean, it would be wonderful if there's that level of flexibility. Teach in parts. Yeah, definitely. Like having sort of sections breaking down complex topics, more exploitation of the content and materials, finding ways of differentiation, mix asynchronous and synchronous input, flipping the classroom. That's a very effective way, but sometimes also it could overwhelm the students, unfortunately. They feel, oh, are you giving me extra work? I'm coming to class and you want me to watch videos, at home. So it does work for some, but not others. But still, I use it, by the way. I'm guilty of flipping classrooms, especially when it comes to heavy courses. Like, for instance, I teach pharmacology for nursing students. And in this course in specific, I have to cover the book from, the beginning to the end, every single chapter of it. So unfortunately, I'll have to flip the classroom in addition to giving material in class. Maybe try rearranging the program from time to time more frequently so things that could be left out would have been covered. Definitely. And that's the nice thing about the agile evaluation and the agile process of going back, looking at feedback, seeing what's missing, looking into gaps, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much. Less is definitely more. Having streamlined, cognitively equitable design does lead to deeper learning and higher persistence. And everything that you shared here does help for sure in making that previous program much better. Okay, so uh, the truth is that knowledge fades if it's not applied, right? And memorizing vocabulary lists or cramming for grammar tests does not prepare learners to use English in the world beyond the classroom, which is the core of what we as educators want. We want our students to connect theory to practice. We want them to utilize what they're learning in the real world. So, what we need to do here is we need to teach strategies, things like note taking, summarizing, self-testing, because these tools does help or do help students learn how to learn, or even better, the metacognition, so they can adapt in real situations. You know, Transfer in this case is the goal. Learners need to take English skills and apply them to authentic tasks, writing emails, collaborating, in teams, interviewing for jobs, engaging in community conversations. And this shift cannot just be left only as as sole like let's say or something only for individual teachers. The leaders have to be engaged. They have to actively model and encourage strategy use across the program so that such a transfer is a consistent expectation, not just an occasional bonus in this case. Okay. um so How about we put the idea of strategy use to test? These are the four, options, and only one of them is truly an example of a learning strategy, by the way. So let's choose one answer. It's quiz time. So, if you can go ahead and choose which of these is an example of strategy use. Perfect. Great job. So, using context clues to guess meaning in an article. And why? Because strategy use is about applying a transferable process that helps learners handle new situations. Guessing meaning from context is definitely a metacognitive reading strategy that students can use across any text they encounter. So, we are looking at transferable skills in this case, right? Otherwise, the other options, memorizing word lists, listening passively, or copying notes, are considered surface level activities, even though sometimes we do feel that the students prefer them, by the way. Because some of them do want to come to class and, they prefer sitting there doing nothing. Some of them, maybe if the phones are available, they could look at them. So they don't want to be engaged in order to be able to do other things. And that is why actually I encourage active-based learning. because maybe the students will, when they feel more engaged, they will feel that, okay, I can participate. Oh, okay, I'm now an agent myself. I'm a learning agent. And this will help them even better instead of them being passive receivers of whatever knowledge we're trying to give them. Perfect. So far, we've looked at how teaching for transfer can empower learners, but there's also another reality that is shaping language programs worldwide, the multilingual classroom. You can have a waterfall. How many of you have multilingual classrooms for those who are teaching? Okay, I can see a hand. Paula, perfect. So I bet, I mean, in every classroom, we will at least find one, right? So, okay, let's see who else. Okay, Ariana, I did see that. Yes, perfect. So definitely we'll all have multilingual, speakers one way or another. And it could feel sometimes like a challenge for some, but in my humble opinion, it's a tremendous resource if we approach it with inclusive leadership, right? And when we talk about inclusive leaders, usually they do four key things. The first is that they foster psychological safety. They create that environment where both teachers and students feel respected and safe to share, even when it comes to the languages and the language barriers and all these things. The second is that they build trust and collaboration, encouraging teamwork among staff and learners, right? And then the third is that they recognize students' first language, the L1, as a resource, not as a problem. And that's very, very important because being multilingual was never a problem. On the contrary, it's actually amazing because it also enhances and boosts the brain functionality, by the way. And it encourages people to even go for learning other languages. There is something called translanguaging. How many of you use translanguaging as an approach? Because translanguaging was actually found to support deeper understanding and confidence. So, an example would be, for instance, if a student is brainstorming, the teacher can encourage the student to brainstorm in their own language and then write down in the English language. So that's utilizing and optimizing and leveraging that multilingualism, right? Um, the last thing is the practice of compassionate leadership. Because compassionate leadership, it's not just a cliche word, by the way. It's so helpful to the work environment. It's helpful for the students, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel welcomed. It's very important for the teachers because it does reduce the teachers' stress levels. When the teachers feel supported, they can definitely better support their learners and thrive. So, that's now hopefully that's not a challenge when we look at it. I'm hoping that we look at it as an opportunity, the multilingualism. Okay, so now to bring your voice in, if you had to choose one word to describe inclusive leadership in your context, what would it be? If you can type it in Slido, and let's see, our collective definition take shape here in the word cloud. Sure, Carla, I'll come to more examples at the end. How about that? Yes? And I also can send you resources. I'll leave my email, by the way, at the end, and you can always send me an email and I can always share resources. Okay, so I can see agency, very important. Equity, yes, indeed. Seeing variety as an opportunity rather than a threat. Engaging, trust. Amazing. I mean, you can see these amazing themes, you know. Um, Empathy. And by the way, this is reinforcing that inclusive leadership is not just a theory. It's something that we all recognize as essential in order to support both the learners and the teachers. So thank you so much for participating. Okay, so we have just seen how inclusive leadership sets the tone for trust and collaboration, but inclusion alone, again, is not enough. It's like an ecosystem. So, something like inclusive leadership needs to be paired with intentional program design. And that's where the backward design or the reverse engineering comes in. So, backward design flips the traditional way of planning instruction. Instead of starting with the content and hoping it aligns with the outcomes, we start with the end goals. You start with the outcomes. So, first, you identify the outcomes. For example, the students should be able to give a persuasive presentation. So that's the outcome. Next, decide on the assessment. Maybe it's a rubric-based oral presentation that measures clarity, organization, and delivery, right? And only then do you plan the instruction after identifying the two big pieces. Activities like, for instance, practicing persuasive techniques, giving feedback, peer feedback, for instance, analyzing real examples. So this is how the reverse engineering happens. And the benefits of that reverse engineering or backward design is that it creates consistency across instructors. And in addition to that, it does ensure that students know what success looks like. They know what's the end result. They know, okay, this is why I'm studying this or learning this in order to achieve this outcome. So by default, it will reduce the overload by keeping the teaching focused and purposeful. Okay, so these are basically this is basically what I was explaining. It should have faded, but it's okay in. So again, the outcome is, for instance, in this case, is that the students need to give persuasive presentations. So the assessment that would map to that outcome would be, for instance, rubric-based oral presentation. And then the instruction in this case would be practice persuasive techniques and peer feedback, for instance. Okay? Great. So now that we have just walked through the steps of backward design, starting with outcomes, aligning assessments, and only then planning instruction, I'm curious about your own reality. So in your programs, what do you usually start planning with? Is it outcomes? Is it content? Is it assessment? So you might find that many of us naturally begin with content, you know, the syllabus, the textbook, or the curriculum map. But some may also begin with assessments because maybe that's what the institution is, like the institutions are prioritizing in this case, for instance. So let's see. Okay, so we have 50-50. We have outcomes and content, 50-50. Oh, now content is 60%. Okay. So actually, again, this is common, right? This is where most of us begin. And this really highlights the challenge of shifting towards backward design. Again, the traditional approach pushes us towards content first, but now that we think backward design, it will help us in anchoring in outcomes, because again, if we adopted that approach instead, we're going to reduce the overload and we're going to increase the clarity for both teachers and students as well. So thank you for your responses. Okay, so we know that backward design helps us align outcomes, assessments, instructions, but once those systems are in place, how do we know if they're actually working, right? That's where evaluation literacy becomes really essential for education leaders. And the evaluation literacy means having the tools and resources to interpret data and feedback meaningfully. Because, I mean, what's the point of having feedbacks and evaluations and us not doing anything with it, right? Whatever data we have is valuable, and that data is there for a reason. It's there for us to improve the process, to optimize, to leverage, right? And there are three common types of data that we can use. There's the student evaluations, and this will capture the learning perceptions and the experiences. There's the peer reviews that usually happen among teachers or faculty in universities, and this will allow the instructors to learn from and support each other. And of course, it happens in a very graceful and elegant, way, supposedly. And then there are the assessment results that show us what students can actually do with what they've learned, and did they really comprehend and grasp the different concepts that we wanted them to get, right? So, but like when it comes to evaluation literacy, we also have to know that it's more than just collecting numbers or more than just collecting forms, right? It's about using the data to improve the curriculum coherence and to be able to provide support for the teachers, for the faculty, and even for the staff, by the way. Because I mean, we are a huge team and it's all interconnected. So when leaders know how to read and act on these different data sources, they create programs that are not only evidence-based, but they're also responsive to the real need of both the students and the teachers. It's very important to, specifically for the students, by the way, again, to feel heard and seen. And one way for them to feel heard and seen is them participating in evaluations. But of course, we have to also bear in mind to create evaluations that are not long, where they're just filling, because they're bored and they feel that okay, I want to get done with it. So we won't be able to get that quality feedback. So also the design, the evaluation or the assessment or the survey design is very important. We have to put that into consideration as well when we start creating those student evaluations. How can we really make sure that we're getting the authentic feedback from them without them just wanting to get done with that evaluation because it's too long, too many questions, and there's no focus. Okay. So, since we have just talked about evaluation literacy and how it depends on interpreting different types of data, and one of the most common forms in learner feedback, how about I ask you this question? Does your institution collect learner feedback regularly? So, again, think not just about whether surveys are sent out, but also whether that feedback is actually reviewed and acted upon. Because, like I mentioned, collecting feedback without follow up does not really serve our students, or teachers. Okay. So, I mean, we have so far 75%, which is encouraging. And 25%, it highlights an opportunity. So I don't see not doing something as negative, but as an opportunity for growth, right? So I mean, for the 75%, or now it's for the 80%, congratulations. But the next question would be how effectively that data is used. Maybe you can write in the chat. Yes, if it's really effectively used. No, if it's not. And if you want to elaborate, you can, start some discussions also. It's fine. For the no, again, maybe you would encourage that to adopt feedback, even starting with something small like exit tickets, like mid-course surveys. And even if the school does not have, you as a learning agent or an educator that is a learning agent, you can create your own. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. In my college, we do have evaluations, but towards the end of the semester. But I felt that I wanted to add a midterm evaluation. So I went to Google Forms and I created my own, short, simple midterm evaluation because I felt that my students deserve to have real-time changes. It's not like I want them to participate in the end of the semester evaluation and while they're already done with my course. So yes, it's very important to participate in the end of semester, but I wanted them to see that they are heard, they are seen. So I share midterm evaluation links for them to fill in how they feel. And sometimes, and nowadays, by the way, that was like a couple of years ago until last year. And now after being a master's in education candidate at Harvard, I started shifting things and learning things in a new way. And I started applying 2 week pulse checks, 4 week agile check-ins, in order to have that real-time conversation through those short evaluations or surveys in order to be able to change whenever possible for the students to get the best experience, learning experience possible. But thank you so much for, the yeses and the nos. Again, no's are opportunity. Yes, that's great. But then also, how are they using the feedback? So, language program leaders face three recurring barriers: resistance to change, both from faculty who might be used to the traditional methods and from administrators that are cautious usually about new initiatives. The lack of training. So many educators not necessarily have had formal exposure to the universal design for learning or the equity-based frameworks. And limited resources. And like I mentioned in the beginning, the time constraints, the budgets, the access to tools, they're always stretched thin in schools and some education institutions, right? So what you can do in this case is build small wins. You can start with one course, one module, or one practice that shows results and build momentum, incremental changes, right? You can showcase data and student stories. You can combine numbers. Whenever you add statistics to stories, in public speaking, even that's always effective, right? Lived experiences in order to make a compelling case that change is important, change is necessary. You can always invest as a leader in faculty support, trainings, mentoring, recognition, because all of these supporting activities do go a long way in sustaining reform. So, by the way, the image behind this slide says it all. Sometimes it feels like we are facing a brick wall when it comes to change resistance, but inclusive leadership does open the door to new possibilities. So even that brick wall can break, can create a door, and you can see a better view by then. Okay, so now that we've talked about barriers that leaders face, let's now look at how change is possible in practice. So that's a real case, by the way, from a US university. So a mid-sized US university was struggling with low persistence rates in the English as a second language programs. And the challenge was an overloaded syllabus in this case, and it hit the adult learners especially hard and led to high dropout rates. So the leadership team decided to redesign the curriculum using the universal design for learning principles. And by the way, the UDL means offering multiple means of representation because we have different types of learners, right? We have a diverse type of learners. So students could access the content through lectures, through videos, through visuals, not just one format. And this is something that I also adopt in my courses. So I do download the video, I do upload the videos, so they have the video link. I change the videos to MP3 so that they can listen to it while they're driving. Of course, beside the slides with the visuals and everything. So we try as much as possible to accommodate the different types of learners, again, for them to feel seen. Because when they feel appreciated and seen, they thrive even more as students. So that's when it comes to the multiple means of representation. Also providing multiple means of action and expression, which means looking into the assignments and not having it as just one type of assignment. So it could be oral presentations, digital projects, portfolios. This allows the students to demonstrate learning in different ways. Because again, every student will thrive in a different way. So, what was before going into the outcome? I think there is a third one, which is um, engagement. Yes. So, creating multiple means of engagement. The students had choices in assignments and opportunities for peer learning. So, those are the three core components of the universal design or the UDL learning. Okay. So, what do you think the outcome was? The outcome was actually positive, of course. Student persistence increased by 18% within just 2 semesters, and the course evaluations in this case reflected much higher satisfaction. So, this example right here shows how the UDL does not just help individual learners, but it transforms program level retention and satisfaction. Um, and I can always share by email, that case study. Um, Great. So now that we have seen what these ideas look like in action, let's wrap up and bring everything back to 5 practical takeaways that you can apply in your own context. These 5 approaches will hopefully help your classrooms and programs with cognitive equity in mind. The first is reduce the overload by streamlining the content and giving space for practice, reflection, strategy use. The second is teaching for transfer, which means focusing less on memorization and more on applying knowledge to real life tasks. The third is lead with inclusion, fostering psychological safety, embracing multilingual assets, and supporting collaboration. And by the way, one new thing that I added to my courses is the psychological safety contract. And it's a contract between me and the student. And I can also share that by email. If you like, also, please, just send me and I'll share it with you. And it does have like, the different terms. Uh, and just in a nutshell, it's basically that we will have that mutual respect, that mutual understanding, that we're learning from each other, and so on and so forth. So that's the psychological safety, and that they have a safe space to express themselves. Um, so that's leading with inclusion. Of course, embracing the multilingual asset, like I said, and supporting collaboration is very important. The fourth is applying backward design, starting with the outcomes, aligning assessments, and then planning instruction purposely. And the fifth is using evaluation literacy. And because it's very important to interpret the feedback and data and just remind ourselves they're not just numbers, but they're tools to improve curriculum coherence and faculty support. So together, these aren't abstract ideals. They are concrete levers that will definitely help you as education leaders in building inclusive, effective, and sustainable language programs, which takes me to another Slido, and hopefully I think this is the last one. So as we come, to the close of our session, I'd like to, ask you about what strategies um, or what's one thing, let's say, one change that you're going to try in your program after today. It could be something small like trimming one overloaded unit, maybe embedding more student choice, maybe starting with outcomes before planning, reverse engineering. Or it could be something bigger. I mean, why not? Introducing evaluation literacy, fostering inclusive leadership practices. There are so many things that could be done for sure. Okay. So to make That's so true, Paul. Thank you. So Paul said it depends on how many people are involved in the decision-making process to make the suggested changes and the organization's politics, as well as the agency given to managers to tweak things based on the feedback. And I hear you. Unfortunately, not necessarily that all the learning environments and all the institutions do have that level of flexibility and academic freedom. Also, it depends on, do we have leaders versus managers, right? Yes, we're education leaders, but also, there will always be that hierarchy. So in that hierarchy, do we have real leaders or do we have managers? Or even, I don't want to say worse, do we have micromanagers? So yeah, I hear you. Okay, perfect. So we can see here, starting with outcomes, having an EDI policy, cutting my syllabus content into half, adding psychological safety contract for sure, and then we also have, I'll try my students to feel seen and heard. Perfect. Shorten my syllabus and reshape it according to their needs. Great. Um, you know, Everything that you shared is amazing, and it would be an amazing first step towards creating that inclusive environment. As we wrap up today's webinar, how about we pull the key threads together into a simple roadmap that you can hopefully take back to your classroom and programs. And I'm just repeating, here in order to emphasize on the important key points that we went over. So just remember that, as educators, it's okay to keep it simple, streamlining our syllabi, reducing the overload, so that learners and even us as educators can breathe. It's important to breathe so as not to feel burnt out. Teaching for transfer. It's very important to focus on strategies and not just coverage, so that students can really apply what they know beyond the classroom, because we want them to have those transferable skills with them to use them beyond their education in their professional world. Valuing multilingualism. We need to see our learners' languages as resources, not obstacles, not challenges. And we also need to build that trust and safety through respect by actually appreciating that they are multilingual and making them feel proud of what they have. Also, leading inclusively. It's very important as education leaders to model compassion, to collaborate and walk the talk through, establishing the different collaborations, the psychological safety, and fostering that psychologically safe environment where everyone is thriving instead of everyone pointing hands, blaming, and creating that toxic negative environment. Planning backwards, that's also very important. Like I said, the reverse engineering, aligning outcomes, assessments, and then instruction with intentional design, because intentional design will result in less overload. And lastly, using evaluation literacy, meaning grounding our program in data-driven improvement, so that the progress that is happening, even if it's incremental, it's clear and it's sustainable, right? Because we value that evaluation and we created that amazing evaluation literacy environment. So these principles here are not meant, by the way, to be overwhelming by any means. They are meant to remind us that equity starts with small intentional design choices, and that these choices can make a huge difference in how learners engage, in how they, thrive, and in how they persist, and in how we support them all in all. So, as we have seen today, when leaders design with cognitive equity, even through the case studies that I shared, they're not just adjusting a syllabus or adding a new tool. They're actually creating classrooms where teachers can thrive without burning out, and learners are able to engage, without being overwhelmed, uh, and by feeling seen and heard again, because it's very important. And the cognitive equity reminds us that, fairness is not about giving everyone, like I mentioned in the beginning, the same, but again, it's about giving each person what they need. It's tailoring what we have from tools to meet the student's needs or the learner's needs. And when we commit to that, what we do is we empower, if we're leaders, we empower our teachers and we empower the learners to flourish. And even if we're teachers and we're committing to that, we empower ourselves and our students, not just inside the classroom, which is very important, but far beyond it. They will always carry that with them, and they will always look back and remember that teacher or that academic leader or that education leader that changed their lives. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Reem. It was quite insightful indeed. So if we have a couple of minutes, so if there are any questions from our participants, we can get those questions. You can either just unmute yourself and ask or use the chat box.
So I remember the first question that was there already is the translanguaging. I did not forget. So again, translanguaging is encouraging the students to use their own first language. It's intentional. Again, everything about inclusivity and trying to reduce that overload and all what comes with it is intentional. So what happens is that maybe you can come up with come up, even if you don't know the student's language, by the way, you can come up with activities that will encourage the student to think with their own language and write with the English language. So they can brainstorm, like I said, in L1, and then they can produce whatever is required in English. Also, maybe creating vocabulary anchors across languages. Maybe if it would be great if there are two students that have the same first language, they can think pair with their language and then share in English language, right? There could be cross comparisons or cross language comparisons for grammar, for instance, which I know is not always easy because the different grammars of the different languages have their different complexities, but still, it could work great. So I hope that helped.
Thank you very much. There's a comment by Ariana saying that designing translanguaging pedagogical materials is challenging. Yes, it's quite tough indeed, I guess, for leaders and
It
teachers
is.
likewise.
So maybe, using visual anchors would help. Maybe letting students work in small groups or even working individually if there isn't, a space for working in groups. Maybe giving multilingual glossaries, for instance. You know, Another thing that would actually sort of embrace that translanguaging is, encouraging the peer teaching. So as if, you know, one peer that has English as the first language and another peer that has Arabic or, French or Spanish as the first language, or even better, one peer that has Spanish, the other has Arabic, and both of them, are learning English, right? So they can teach each other a phrase in their own language and then translate it in English, right? So that's another way of peer teaching where you're involving the different languages and you're giving them that sense of pride. Oh, I'm teaching you my language. And we're also learning, how to translate uh, our languages into English, for instance. So these are some maybe ways that, would work.
And Rim Paul asked or said he would be interested in seeing a copy of a psychological safety contract if that's possible. You're muted, Rim, sorry.
Sorry, I'll put my email here. Um, let's see which one. Let me use the other one because some of them do have a lot of spam and then emails get lost usually. Of course. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Mhm.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I can share it in the chat. Let me see. Yes, I can share it in the chat, actually.
That would be great
Um,
indeed because Ariane also asked for it.
yes, let me go to the nursing course. Where is it? Okay, I have too many folders. Okay, and then psychological. Okay, I found it. Okay, perfect. So I think if I dragged and dropped it, it will go here, right? Let's see. Yes. Okay,
Thank you very much, Reem.
of course.
I think there are no other questions on the chat box as far as I can see. So,
Well, my email is there, so if you ever had any questions, anything that you wanted to discuss, you want to schedule a Zoom, whatever it is, I mean, I'm always open. I love
mm.
education and I love educators, and of course, it's not like I'm biased. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you very much, Reem. I think it was quite insightful, and I especially, based on your takeaway slide and also my takeaways, I mean, having a data-driven approach and follow-up of data and feedback, and especially the backward design, these are all quite valuable for the programs and institutions. So thanks a lot for this insightful webinar, and thanks a lot, everyone, for your participation and being here with us today. And
It was a
if,
pleasure.
yeah, and also I'm putting the link for our next webinar in December, just before Christmas. So if you would like to register again for another insightful webinar, here you can find the link. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day in whatever country you are. I'm in the morning now. It's 9 a.m. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.